The ancient oak tree fell in 5 thunderous seconds. 2 centuries of roots, bark, and memory collapsed in a single breath, crushing Karen Whitlock's pearl-white Mercedes convertible like a soda can. The sound, a visceral crack followed by a deafening crunch, ripped through the quiet Texas morning, shaking birds from their nests and jolting me out of my coffee-induced calm. I'd always wondered how it would end. I just never thought it would end this way. The sun had barely risen over Cedar Ridge, a sleepy town in the Texas Hill Country where gossip traveled faster than the Wi-Fi. I was sitting on my porch, cradling a mug of black coffee, staring at the oak. My oak. The one my grandfather had called Old Ironbark, a 200-year-old sentinel with branches that clawed at the sky like gnarled fingers. Its leaves cast dappled shadows over my 6-acre property, a living heirloom that had survived droughts, hurricanes, and 3 generations of my family. I'd inherited the land and the tree 6 months ago when Grandpa Joe passed. The lawyer's letter mentioned the oak's appraisal, $250,000, a figure that made my stomach flip. Rare specimen, the report said. Irreplaceable. But to me, it was priceless. It was the tree I climbed as a kid, the one where Grandpa taught me to whittle, the one that sheltered his ashes beneath its roots. I didn't notice the sawdust at first. Karen Whitlock moved into the McMansion next door 2 weeks after I did. She arrived in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and entitlement, her SUV plastered with HOA board member bumper stickers. The first time she stormed onto my lawn, she was clutching a clipboard, her coral pink nails tapping impatiently. Your tree, she snapped, jabbing a finger at Old Ironbark, is dumping leaves into my pool. It's unsanitary. I shrugged. It's November. Trees shed. Her face tightened. I filed a complaint with the HOA. That thing is a menace. It's too close to the property line and it's infested. Infested, right? The infestation was a single squirrel. Over the next month, Karen's campaign escalated. She cited HOA bylaws about unsightly vegetation. She mailed me invoices for pool cleanings. She even called the county, claiming the oak was structurally unsound. When the inspector came, he laughed. Ma'am, he told her, this tree'll outlive us all. Karen didn't laugh. That morning, the air smelled like rain. I was scrolling through my phone, half listening to the distant hum of a chainsaw, probably old Mr. Henderson trimming his mesquites again. Then came the crack. It wasn't a normal sound. It was the kind of sound that bypasses your ears and shoots straight to your gut. I dropped my coffee, the mug shattering as I sprinted toward the noise. What I saw froze me mid-step. Old Ironbark was gone. In its place, a jagged stump, its rings glistening like fresh scars. The rest of the tree lay sprawled across my lawn, its massive trunk crushing Karen's Mercedes, which was parked conveniently right on the edge of her driveway. The car's hood was flattened, windows exploded, airbags dangling like deflated lungs. And Karen? Karen was screaming. She stood barefoot in silk pajamas, her bleach blonde bob quivering as she shrieked. Look what your stupid tree did. I gaped at her. My tree? You parked here. Why would I? I'll see you into oblivion, she spat, face mottled red. This is negligence. I've told you 1,000 times that death trap was dangerous. My eyes darted to the stump. Something was wrong. The cut was too clean, too deliberate. Freshwood chips littered the grass. Someone cut it down, I breathed. Karen froze. For a split second, her mask slipped, a flicker of panic in her Botox-smooth forehead. Then she sniffed. Don't try to blame me for your incompetence. My lawyer will be in touch. She stormed off, leaving me in the wreckage. I crouched by the stump, running my hand over the cut. Chainsaw marks. Recent ones. My chest tightened. Last night, I'd heard a truck engine around 2 a.m. but chalked it up to coyotes. Alex? I turned. Mrs. Rivera, my 80-year-old neighbor, hobbled over, her house dress flapping. She gestured to her security camera, a tiny lens pointed at my yard. I saw something peculiar last night, she whispered. Before she could finish, a black sedan screeched into Karen's driveway. A man in a suit stepped out, handing her a stack of papers. Karen smirked, then flung them at my feet. Enjoy homelessness, she said. As the sedan peeled away, I stared at the words, $500,000 in damages. But Mrs. Rivera's camera was still rolling. That night, I rewound the footage. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. Shadows moved across my yard. 2 figures. A chainsaw's whine. And then, the screen went black. A knock rattled my door. It was the sheriff. Mr. Carter, he said, we've got a problem. Behind him, Karen smiled. The knock on my door was sharp and impatient. I opened it to find Sheriff Daniels standing on my porch, his hat in his hands and a grim expression on his face. Behind him, Karen Whitlock stood with her arms crossed, her lips curled into a smug smile. Mr. Carter, the sheriff began, his voice heavy with formality. We've received a complaint from Mrs. Whitlock here. She's alleging that your negligence led to significant property damage. I'm going to need to ask you a few questions. I glanced at Karen, who raised an eyebrow as if daring me to argue. Sheriff, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, that tree didn't fall on its own. Someone cut it down. I have evidence. Evidence? Karen interrupted, her voice dripping with mockery. You mean the sawdust you're so obsessed with? Please. That could have come from anywhere. The sheriff held up a hand to silence her. Let's not jump to conclusions. Mr. Carter, do you have proof that someone deliberately cut down the tree? I hesitated. Mrs. Rivera's security footage was my best bet, but it had cut off before showing the culprits. I'm working on it, I said. But I know it wasn't an accident. That tree was healthy. It wouldn't have fallen on its own. Karen snorted. Healthy? That thing was a hazard. I've been saying it for months. And now it's destroyed my car. Sheriff, I demand justice. The sheriff sighed, clearly caught between two feuding neighbors. All right, here's what's going to happen. Mr. Carter, I'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Mrs. Whitlock, I'll need yours as well. In the meantime, I'd advise both of you to avoid any further confrontations. Karen smirked. Oh, don't worry, Sheriff. I'll be too busy talking to my lawyer to bother with him. After the sheriff left, I called Mrs. Rivera. She answered on the first ring, her voice hushed. Alex, I saw everything. Well, almost everything. My camera caught two people sneaking onto your property last night. They had a chainsaw, but the footage cut off before I could see their faces. My heart sank. Do you think it was Karen? I don't know, Mrs. Rivera admitted, but I wouldn't put it past her. That woman's been after your tree since the day she moved in. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. If the footage didn't show the culprits, I needed another angle. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside to inspect the scene. The stump was still there, raw and exposed. I crouched down, shining the light on the cut. The chainsaw marks were unmistakable, clean, deliberate strokes. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Then I noticed something else, footprints. They were faint, but they led from the stump toward Karen's property. My pulse quickened. If I could match those prints to Karen or her husband, it would be a smoking gun. The next morning, I received a certified letter from Karen's lawyer. The lawsuit was official, $500,000 in damages plus legal fees. The complaint accused me of gross negligence for failing to maintain the tree, which they claimed was an obvious hazard. I felt sick. $500,000? That was more than double the tree's appraised value. Karen wasn't just trying to punish me, she was trying to ruin me. I called my own lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Rebecca Hayes who specialized in property disputes. This is a classic case of blame shifting, she said after reviewing the documents. Karen's trying to make you the scapegoat for her own actions. But if we can prove she's the one who cut down the tree, this case will fall apart. How do we do that? I asked. We start with the evidence, Rebecca said. The sawdust, the footprints, the security footage. And we subpoena Karen's financial records. If she hired someone to cut down the tree, there'll be a paper trail. That afternoon, I got a call from Mrs. Rivera. Alex, you need to come over right now. I found something. I rushed to her house where she was waiting with her laptop. I managed to recover the rest of the footage, she said, her eyes gleaming. It's not perfect, but, well, just watch. She hit play. The video showed two figures sneaking onto my property. One was holding a chainsaw. The other was carrying a gas can. They moved quickly, their faces obscured by hoods. But as they approached the tree, one of them stumbled, and their hood fell back. It was Karen's husband, Greg. Gotcha, I whispered. Armed with the footage, I went straight to Karen's house. She answered the door, her expression hardening when she saw me. What do you want? I know it was you, I said, holding up my phone. I have video of Greg cutting down my tree. You're not going to get away with this. For a moment, Karen looked panicked. Then she laughed. Oh, please, that footage is worthless. You can't prove anything. We'll see about that, I said. I'm taking this to the sheriff and to the HOA. Let's see how they feel about one of their board members committing felony vandalism. Karen's smile faltered. You're bluffing. Am I? I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway. I showed the footage to Sheriff Daniels later that day. He watched it twice, his expression growing darker each time. This is serious, he said. If Greg Whitlock cut down your tree, that's criminal damage. And if Karen's involved, that's conspiracy. What happens now? I asked. We'll bring them in for questioning, the sheriff said. But we'll need more than this to make it stick. Do you have anything else? I thought about the footprints, the sawdust, the financial records Rebecca was working on. I'm working on it, I said. That night, as I was going through old HOA meeting minutes, I found something interesting. Karen had proposed a motion to remove hazardous vegetation from the neighborhood 6 months ago. It was voted down, but the minutes noted her frustration. This is a safety issue, she'd said. If something isn't done, someone's going to get hurt. At the time, I thought she was just being dramatic. Now it felt like a threat. Then my phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. Alex, I just got Karen's financial records. You're not going to believe this. What is it? I asked. She paid $5,000 to a landscaping company the day before the tree was cut down. The company specializes in tree removal. I felt a surge of triumph. That's it. That's the smoking gun. Not quite, Rebecca said. The company's owner is claiming it was a routine job, but if we can tie them to Greg, we've got her. The next morning, I woke up to find my mailbox destroyed. Spray painted across the ruins were the words, "Drop the case or else." Karen wasn't going down without a fight. I stared at the shattered remains of my mailbox. The words, "Drop the case or else," glaring at me in bright red spray paint. My hands clenched into fists. Karen wasn't just playing dirty. She was escalating. I called Sheriff Daniels immediately. He arrived within minutes, his expression grim as he examined the damage. "This is intimidation," he said, snapping photos with his phone. "We'll add it to the case file. But Alex, you need to be careful. If Karen's willing to go this far, there's no telling what she'll do next." "I'm not backing down," I said firmly. "Not after what she's done." The sheriff nodded. "I'll put a patrol car on your street tonight. In the meantime, keep your doors locked and your eyes open." Later that day, Rebecca and I met with the owner of the landscaping company Karen had hired. His name was Carl Mendez, a burly man with calloused hands and a nervous demeanor. He sat across from us in Rebecca's office, fidgeting with his hat. "I already told the sheriff," Carl said, avoiding eye contact. "It was a routine job. Mrs. Whitlock called and said she needed some trees trimmed. That's it." "And the $5,000 payment?" Rebecca asked, sliding a bank statement across the table. "That's a lot of money for a routine job." Carl swallowed hard. "She said it was urgent. I didn't ask questions." "Did you know the tree was on my property?" I asked, leaning forward. Carl hesitated. "She said it was hers. She showed me papers." "Fake papers," Rebecca said. "You cut down a 200-year-old oak tree without verifying ownership. That's negligence at best, conspiracy at worst." Carl's face paled. "I didn't know. I swear." Rebecca exchanged a glance with me. "Here's the deal, Carl. You cooperate with us, and we'll make sure the charges against you are minimal. But if you lie to protect Karen, you'll go down with her." Carl slumped in his chair. "What do you want me to do?" With Carl's cooperation, we set a trap. Rebecca arranged for him to call Karen and record the conversation. He was to tell her he was being investigated and needed her to confirm the job was legitimate. Karen took the bait. "Of course it was legitimate," she snapped over the phone. "I paid you to remove that dangerous tree. If anyone asks, you tell them it was a safety issue. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Carl said, his voice trembling. The recording was crystal clear. The trial began 2 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even a few HOA members who'd turned against Karen. She sat at the defendant's table, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. Rebecca opened with a bombshell. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Whitlock conspired to destroy my client's property. Not only did she hire a landscaping company to cut down a 200-year-old oak tree, but she also falsified documents to make it appear as though the tree was on her property." Karen's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. We played the recording of Karen's conversation with Carl. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Karen's face turned beet red. "That's not proof," she shouted, jumping to her feet. "He's lying." He's trying to frame me. The judge slammed his gavel. Mrs. Whitlock, control yourself. Next, we presented the security footage from Mrs. Rivera's camera. It showed Greg Whitlock sneaking onto my property with a chainsaw. The timestamp matched Carl's testimony. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that Greg acted alone, but Rebecca countered with the bank statement showing Karen's $5,000 payment. This was a coordinated effort, Rebecca said. Mrs. Whitlock didn't just want the tree gone. She wanted to punish my client for refusing to comply with her demands. The final blow came when Carl took the stand. He recounted how Karen had pressured him to cut down the tree, assuring him it was legal. She said it was a safety issue, Carl said. But now I know she lied. Karen's lawyer tried to discredit him, but it was no use. The evidence was overwhelming. When the judge delivered his verdict, the courtroom fell silent. Mrs. Whitlock, he said, you were found guilty of conspiracy, vandalism, and filing a false police report. You are ordered to pay Mr. Carter $300,000 in damages, plus legal fees. Karen's face went white. This is outrageous. I'll appeal. The judge ignored her. As for Mr. Whitlock, he will face separate criminal charges for his role in this matter. Greg, who had been sitting in the back of the courtroom, bolted for the door. Sheriff Daniels caught him before he could escape. The news spread quickly. Karen was removed from the HOA board, and the community turned against her. Her McMansion went up for sale, and she and Greg moved out of state to avoid the backlash. As for me, I used the settlement money to plant a new oak tree in old Ironbark's place. It wouldn't be the same, but it was a start. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Karen. You think you've won, it read, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done with me. Life after the trial was quieter, but not entirely peaceful. The settlement money allowed me to rebuild and replant, but the shadow of Karen's threat lingered. I planted a young oak sapling where old Ironbark once stood, a symbol of resilience and new beginnings. The community rallied around me, hosting a small ceremony to honor the legacy of the old tree and celebrate the promise of the new one. But Karen's letter haunted me. This isn't over. A month after the trial, I woke up to find my car tires slashed. Scrawled across the windshield in red paint was the word traitor. I called Sheriff Daniels, but without evidence, there was little he could do. Keep your guard up, he warned. Karen might be gone, but she's got friends in low places. I installed security cameras around my property, determined not to be caught off guard again. One night, the cameras caught movement near the sapling. I grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside, only to find a figure crouched beside the young tree, a bottle of herbicide in hand. Stop! I shouted, startling the intruder. They bolted, but not before I got a clear look at their face. It was one of Karen's former HOA lackeys, a man named Tom who'd always been her staunchest supporter. I called the sheriff, who arrested Tom an hour later. Under questioning, he confessed that Karen had paid him to destroy the sapling. She said if she couldn't have her way, no one could, Tom admitted. With Tom's confession, Sheriff Daniels issued a warrant for Karen's arrest. She was found hiding in a motel 2 states away, her once pristine appearance replaced by disheveled hair and a frantic demeanor. When she was brought back to Cedar Ridge, I faced her one last time in court. You just couldn't let it go, could you? I said, my voice steady. Karen glared at me, her eyes burning with hatred. You ruined my life. I was just returning the favor. The judge wasn't swayed. Karen was sentenced to 5 years in prison for conspiracy, vandalism, and attempted destruction of property. Greg, who had been out on bail, was sentenced to 3 years for his role in cutting down old Ironbark. With Karen and Greg behind bars, the community finally found peace. The young oak sapling thrived, its leaves reaching toward the sun as if determined to grow into a new giant. I often sat beneath its branches, thinking about everything that had happened. Old Ironbark was gone, but its spirit lived on, not just in the new tree, but in the lessons it had taught us all. This story is a reminder that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and resilience, please like, share, and comment below. Let me know what you think about Karen's downfall and how you would have handled the situation. Don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories and real-life dramas. Together, we can shine a light on the Karens of the world and celebrate the power of community and perseverance. Thank you for reading, and remember, when life knocks you down, plant a new tree and keep growing.